Welcome to the Man Card. Today's project we're making I guess you call it a stealth gaming table. I've taken an old dining room table. My customer asked me to make just the carpentry aspect of it, so it's not finished yet. They're going to finish it at home. But I've got the rough carpentry done. Basically what it is an old dining table. We took the top off, added a board underneath so that there's a gaming surface so you can leave puzzles or games set up, but still use it as a dining table when they want to. Now I've made fully custom gaming tables. You can take a look at that if you go to my website listed below. You'll be able to see some of my other projects, one of which was a fully custom. I made the legs on up, some nice rails to go on the bottom to hold cups and other things. Now all that can be added to something like this, but this project they wanted to keep it at a budget. So today's project is a budget gaming table. So what's cool about this one is one person or maybe two people, you can lift the top off and you've got your gaming surface. When you look at this gaming surface, it's recessed in so that you have a nice play surface underneath. You also have recessed on the sides so that you can put LED lighting around if you'd like. This allows for using a standard table without having to increase the height a whole lot. This one increases it by an inch and a half, just your 2x4 width. I've got some boards here that help to hide the hardware underneath for mounting the legs. These can be removed easily so that you can take the legs on and off to move it in and out of a room. So follow me along, I'll show you how to make this, put it together. So you can see the underside of our table. What we're going to do is we're going to start by taking a measurement with the skirt still attached. That way we can get a good measurement from the skirt width and lengthwise to cut our board that we're going to be inserting into this to make it our recessed gaming table. Now that we have our measurements, we're going to go ahead and take and lay it out on a piece of 1/2-inch plywood here. That way we have a good playing surface in our recessed table. My sophisticated straight edge. So now that we have our lines marked out for the size of our table, what we're going to do is we're going to take and cut this out. We're going to get it set in the table with the skirt still on there, make sure we're good to go, and then we're going to go ahead and get our Kreg holes drilled for our screws that we're going to be mounting it to the table with. One of the things I wish I had was a longer table, that way I could do these sheets of plywood without any problem. But you do with what you got. So we have this test fitted in. It's a nice snug fit all the way around. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to take our Kreg jig, we're going to drill some holes from the bottom out, and we're going to be screwing this around the outside edge of the skirt of the original table. And then on these corners where the legs go, I'll be cutting an angle at those. And then on the top side, once we start putting our kind of a ledger board, an armrest board around the top edge, that'll help us really kind of hide the cut corner there. Put a little angled 2x4 into the corner, and it'll actually add a little bit of detail and kind of finish things off. But we'll get there in a little bit. For now, we're going to focus on the insert here and work on this part of it. These corners don't have to be perfect because they'll be covered by the panels in the end, so just making this easy on myself. Next step is marking where I want my holes to be for my crag jig. Now we're taking these every 6 inches. I'm going to be putting a screw every 6 because I want this to be as sturdy as I can. At a 1/2 inch piece of ply, there's not a lot of thickness there for the screw to actually hold on to. Now, it being plywood, it definitely has a little bit better grab, and by going through the bottom, what it'll do is it'll put the bigger piece of the wood on top, so pressure downward from the top of the gaming surface will be applied onto the screw and the biggest piece of meat on the board, which will be the best option for what we're doing here. Now, part of the reason I'm going with the 1/2 inch is because I want to keep this table somewhat light. I don't want to make it so heavy that you can't move it around, and I still want it to be strong but not ridiculous. So this is my Craig jig. What it does, it has an angled cylinder that angles your drill bit at just the right angle so that I can get a pre-drill for the pocket screws I'll be using. So from the bottom you're not going to see the screws. They kind of insert into the wood and they help hold it in place really well. Now they sell a clamp that you can actually clamp this jig down to the table with. Honestly, it takes forever to use. So I just risk the palm of my hand. Don't do this at home. Now that we have the bottom drilled, laid out, ready to go for the insert, what I'm going to do next is go ahead and put this in place and put a couple of screws in just to hold the skirt to where I need it to be. Then I'm going to take the skirt off the table so that I can start forming the top. So I've got a few screws around this base holding it into place. I've pulled the top off. That way it holds its shape for me. Next step is going to be creating my 2x4 rails across here so you have an armrest while you're playing your games down inside. As we'll be going next, I'll be taking some measurements for my 2x4s, seeing kind of where I want them to sit and how I want them to work. So what I'm looking for is I'm going to have a full-length board at each end of the table, and I'm going to butt these long boards up to it. So I'm looking for the length that I want that full board to be. I'm going to center these boards on the skirt, as they were originally. That gives me enough that this will hide underneath the tabletop and still allow me to have enough game playing surface and a comfortable spot to rest your arms while you're playing the game. So I've got these centered on the table. Got 1.25 inch overhang on each side. And what I'm looking for is the full length that I'm going to be making my end boards. That number is 36.25. So I'm going to cut 2 boards at that length. Now that I've got my end boards cut, I'm going to go ahead and cut my sideboards. I'm going to want them to fit right in between, so I'm going to get that measurement real quick. Next step is drilling our pocket holes for our armrests here. We're going to do them upside down. I want to hide these pocket holes underneath, so I'm going to drill those on the bottom side of the boards. Now that I've got these holes drilled, I'm going to go ahead and line these up. Get them lined up smooth on the bottoms and the edges. Screw these into place. Next up is flipping this over, getting it measured out so we're even on all the edges, getting it screwed into place. Once the legs are mounted in, I want to be able to slide a piece of wood underneath there so that it can hide those brackets from view while you're playing the games. I'm going to take this 2x6, I'm going to cut some triangles off of it, and then I'll be taking and screwing these triangles just right into those corners, and it'll kind of create a nice effect at the corners but allow me to hide some stuff underneath. So now that I've got most of the preliminary sanding done, everything's pretty smooth, just a gloss over with 100 grit. I'll be going over it again with a finer grit here in a little bit. But now that I've got everything, all the sharp edges, all the raised edges sanded down, I'm going to go ahead and take my router. I've got a 1/4 over bit. That 1/4 round bit's going to go ahead and give me a nice rounded edge all the way around, so that when people are leaning up against it, they don't have that sharp edge digging into their arm. Just a nice rounded edge. We're going to be doing that on the inside and the outside of this rail here. Alright, we've got our primary shape done, everything's been sanded, we've got the edge routed so that it's nice and comfortable. I'm going to go ahead and get a couple of boards cut that'll fit just underneath these ledges so that it'll hide the brackets for putting the legs on. And then I'll be putting some ledger boards on the bottom of the tabletop itself, so when you put the tabletop on, it stays centered on this, that way it doesn't wiggle about or slide off. Now before we get into any of what I just told you I would be getting into, I'm going to go ahead and finish screwing this thing all the way around. That way I can solidify this base in here. Now I know every time I use one of my saws, I probably make someone over at OSHA die a little bit inside. I can just picture their voice screaming in their computer screen, "Why would you use that broken piece of machinery?" And I rejoice a little bit. Yeah. You know what? Be safe with what you're doing. Get your ear and eye protection on. Use your common sense. And if anybody would like to complain about the saws that I'm using that don't have the guards and whatnot, feel free to send me a new saw. It'd be great. I'd appreciate it. So what we've got here, I went ahead and cut a 45-degree angle on the ends of each of those little boards. They're just wide enough so that what'll happen is you can slide that up in there. It'll cover all that metal hardware. It'll still give them a ledge so that they can put LEDs around the outside edge of that table. But once we get it into place, we'll put a couple little screws that can be removed so that when they want to remove the legs to move the table somewhere, you just have to pull the screws out. Pull this little angled piece of wood out and you'll be able to remove the legs. So all four of those, we'll pre-drill, get some screws ready, and move on to the tabletop. Alright, so I've got this tabletop up here on my saw. Well, you can see the lines where the skirt used to marry to that tabletop. What I'm going to be doing is I know where the skirt is now located on the edge all the way around underneath my 2x4 armrest. Now I'll measure the width of my 2x4, should be 1.25 inches from that line here. 1.25 inches out, that's where I'll start my ledger boards to center the tabletop once it's in place. So I'll be putting the board on all 4 sides. That way once you place the tabletop in, it's nice and heavy, it'll hold it into the shape of the new tabletop. But it can be easily removed for your gaming needs. So you can get an idea of what we're doing. I've got all 4 of my boards placed where I would like those, and I'll be measuring in from the edge of the board or from the edge of the table. Get those. I'll double check my width measurement to make sure it'll fit within the table itself. When I went to put this together, this little ledge here that was cut out for that metal bracket that goes through, when I have my board sitting there, my board actually butts up against it. So what I'm going to do before I put this together to show you is I'm going to cut this down just a little bit, probably about 3/4 inch lower. Just going to saw that off, cut this triangle out, and that'll allow for this leg to slide into its usual place where it sat on the table. So you can see what I'm talking about. End up cutting that down, just grooving that out so that it would have a little bit lower an edge. It's about 3/4 inch I had to take out. That way it would fit underneath the new board that we put in the base of that table. The skirt will still hide all of this, so you won't see any of the rough cuts or the edges, which will work perfect. And you have your gaming table.